I stood in the middle of a crowded Silicon Valley ballroom and watched my husband of 4 years wrap his hand around the waist of a millionaire venture capitalist. When I walked up to his table to confront him, he looked me dead in the eye, turned to his wealthy investors, and said he had no idea who I was. The woman next to him simply laughed, slipped a crisp $1 bill into my collar, and whispered that she would take good care of my husband tonight. She had no idea that her little stunt just cost her a $20 million empire. My name is Natalie, and at 33 years old, I build data algorithms from my home office. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your loyalty repaid with absolute betrayal. This journey is about how I used their own arrogance to destroy them. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Fairmont Hotel cast a golden glow over the tech industry elite. Waiters in sharp black vests carried trays of champagne through the crowd. I was not supposed to be there. I had spent the last 3 weeks locked in my home office, coding the final predictive modules for a financial algorithm running on 4 hours of sleep and instant coffee. Jason, my husband, and the supposed brilliant chief executive officer of his new startup, had told me this gala was a closed-door investor dinner. He specifically said spouses were strictly forbidden because it would make him look unprofessional. But when my local server crashed and I desperately needed the authentication key he kept on his laptop, I drove to the hotel to quickly grab it. The security guard at the front let me slip in when a large group of executives entered. I navigated through the sea of tailored suits and designer gowns, scanning the massive room for Jason. I finally spotted him near the open bar. He was not talking business or pitching software. He was whispering into the ear of a stunning woman in a crimson silk dress. I recognized her immediately from financial magazines and industry blogs. Her name was Cassidy. She was a senior partner at one of the most ruthless venture capital funds in New York. She was widely known for hostile corporate takeovers and an ego that matched her massive investment portfolio. Her hand was resting intimately on Jason's chest, her manicured fingers playing with his expensive silk tie. It was the exact tie I bought him for our anniversary just 2 months ago. I walked directly up to their high-top table. My heart pounded heavily against my ribs, but my face remained entirely calm. "Jason?" I said, my voice steady over the ambient jazz music. "We need to talk right now." Jason froze. The color drained from his face for a fraction of a second before a smooth and entirely artificial smile took over his features. He looked at Cassidy, then back at me, his eyes completely blank as if he were staring at a ghost. "I am so sorry," Jason said loudly, ensuring the other wealthy investors nearby could hear his clear voice. "I think you have the wrong person. Security usually handles the overeager fans at these events. Did you want a quick photo for your tech blog before they escort you out of the building?" The utter humiliation hit me like a physical blow. He was pretending I was a complete stranger. My own husband, whose startup was entirely built on the software I developed for free in our living room, was discarding me in front of the very people he was trying to impress. Cassidy let out a sharp and mocking laugh. She looked me up and down, taking in my plain dark jeans and simple blazer, contrasting heavily with her designer gown. She reached into her expensive leather clutch and pulled out a crisp $1 bill. With a condescending smirk, she stepped forward and slid the dollar into the collar of my shirt. "Buy yourself a coffee, sweetie," Cassidy said, her voice dripping with venomous pity. "You look exhausted, and do not worry about Jason. I will take very good care of him tonight. Go home. This room is strictly for adults." The surrounding investors chuckled, turning their attention back to their expensive drinks. Any other woman might have screamed. I might have thrown my drink in his face, or caused a huge scene that would have gotten me dragged out by hotel security. But I did not shed a single tear. I pulled the dollar bill from my collar, folded it perfectly in half, and slid it into my pocket. I looked at Jason, memorizing the arrogant sneer on his face. Then I looked at Cassidy, carefully noting the exact title and company name printed on her VIP badge. I turned on my heel and walked out the glass doors into the cool night air. Jason thought he had just secured his future with a wealthy investor by discarding his boring wife. He did not realize he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle his entire life. The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway. I had not slept a single minute since walking out of that hotel ballroom. Instead of crying or calling friends to vent, I spent the night packing every item Jason owned into heavy-duty garbage bags. I dragged them into the garage. Then I called a 24-hour emergency locksmith. By 6 in the morning, every external door had a new reinforced deadbolt. I stood in the kitchen holding a hot mug of coffee. I actually used the $1 bill Cassidy gave me to pay for part of the coffee beans I bought on my way home. It felt like the perfect way to start the day. I took a slow sip and watched the live feed from the front porch security camera on my tablet. At exactly 7:15, a black luxury sedan pulled into the driveway. Jason stepped out. He looked like a man who had spent the night celebrating a multi-million-dollar deal in a hotel suite. His suit jacket was slung over his shoulder, his tie was missing, and even through the grainy camera feed I saw the faint reddish smudge of lipstick on his collar. He walked up the front steps, with a ridiculous swagger whistling a quiet tune. He genuinely believed he had won. He thought I was just a subservient wife who would be inside weeping waiting for him to offer a pathetic apology. He assumed my silence last night was a sign of complete defeat. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his silver keychain, and slid his key into the front door. He turned it. Nothing happened. He frowned, pulling the key out and inspecting it before shoving it back into the lock with more force. He jiggled the handle. The heavy oak door did not budge an inch. I watched his expression shift from mild confusion to sudden annoyance. He pushed his weight against the wood, rattling the brass handle loudly. "Natalie," he called out, his voice muffled through the thick door. "Open up right now. The lock is stuck again." I did not move. I just took another sip of my coffee, keeping my eyes glued to the glowing screen. Jason knocked harder. The polite annoyance in his voice quickly vanished, replaced by the ugly, arrogant tone I had come to know so well. "Natalie, I know you are in there. Do not play these childish games with me. Open this door right now. We are adults. We need to have a rational conversation about last night. You are overreacting as usual, and I am not going to stand out here like an idiot." Ah, there it was. The classic Jason maneuver. Deflect the blame and accuse me of being irrational. If this were a year ago, I might have opened the door and let him gaslight me into an apology. But the woman who tolerated his disrespect died the moment he pretended not to know me in front of his wealthy investors. When I still did not answer, Jason lost his temper entirely. He began violently banging his fists against the door, the sound echoing loudly through the quiet neighborhood. "Are you insane?" he screamed, his face turning red as he glared directly into the security camera. "You think you can lock me out of my own house? You think throwing a temper tantrum is going to change anything? I am the chief executive officer of a company about to close a massive funding round. I do not have time for your emotional instability today." He kicked the bottom of the door, leaving a scuff mark on the fresh paint. "Listen to me very carefully," he yelled, pointing a finger at the camera lens. "You have exactly 10 seconds to unlock this door and let me inside. If you do not, I am calling the police. I will have them break this door down, and I will have you physically removed from my property. You will be out on the street with absolutely nothing. I pay the bills here. This is my house. You are just a freelancer who barely makes enough to buy groceries. Do not push me." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering aggressively over the screen. He was panting, completely dropping the polished executive persona he worked so hard to maintain. "Call them," I whispered to the empty kitchen, tapping the screen of my tablet to make sure the camera was actively recording his entire meltdown. Jason dialed the numbers and pressed the phone to his ear, pacing furiously across the porch. He was about to learn a hard lesson about property laws, but I was more than happy to let the police department teach him. 14 minutes later, a black and white police cruiser pulled to a stop at the curb. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the windows of the neighboring houses. Jason immediately transformed. The red-faced, screaming tyrant vanished. In his place stood the polished, articulate executive. He smoothed down his wrinkled dress shirt, ran a hand through his hair, and walked briskly down the driveway to meet the two officers as they stepped out of their vehicle. Through my tablet screen, I watched him orchestrate his performance. He kept his voice low and steady, gesturing toward the house with a look of deep fabricated concern. I could not hear every word, but his body language told the entire story. He was playing the exhausted provider dealing with a hysterical, unstable wife. He pointed at the door, shook his head sadly, and tapped his chest as if explaining the heavy burden he carried. The officers nodded sympathetically. One of them pulled out a notepad. They believed him completely. Why would they not? He looked the part of a successful man, just trying to get into his own home. The three of them walked up the driveway together. Jason hung back slightly, letting the officers take the lead. The taller officer knocked heavily on the reinforced wood. "Ma'am, this is the police," he called out. "We need you to open the door and step outside. Your husband says you have locked him out of his residence." I set my coffee mug on the kitchen counter and took a deep breath. I walked to the entryway, but I did not go alone. Standing in the hallway was David, a private security contractor I had hired through an elite agency at 3 o'clock in the morning. David was built like a tank dressed in a sharp black suit and possessed a calm, intimidating presence. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Jason smirked, expecting to see me crying. His smile instantly dissolved when David stepped forward, positioning himself squarely in the center of the doorway. I stood safely behind David's right shoulder, holding a thick, pristine manila envelope. The two police officers instinctively took a half step back, surprised by the professional muscles standing between them and me. "Good morning, officers," I said, keeping my tone perfectly polite and even. "How can I help you?" The lead officer cleared his throat, glancing between David and me. "Ma'am, your husband here states that you are having an emotional dispute and have illegally locked him out of his home. We need you to let him inside to gather his belongings and de-escalate the situation." I looked at Jason. He puffed out his chest, silently daring me to argue with the police. "I understand why he told you that," I replied smoothly. "However, Jason is mistaken. This is not his home. He does not own this property, he is not on the mortgage, and he does not hold a lease. He is legally a guest, and his invitation to remain on these premises has been officially revoked." Jason let out a loud, theatrical laugh. "Officers, she is completely delusional. We have been married for 4 years. My name is on the mailbox. I sleep in the master bedroom. Tell her to step aside before I press charges for criminal lockout." I did not argue. I simply opened the manila envelope and handed a stack of notarized documents to the lead officer. "What you are holding is the official deed to this property, along with the articles of organization for a limited liability company," I explained calmly. "I purchased this house and the land it sits on 2 years before I even met Jason. The property is owned entirely by an LLC. I am the sole managing member of that LLC. Jason has never paid rent to the LLC, nor has he ever contributed a single cent to the property taxes or the mortgage. Under state law, he is not a tenant. He is a trespasser." The officers fell silent. They flipped through the heavy pages, scanning the legal jargon, the state seals, and the clear, undeniable lines of ownership. The second officer leaned over, reading the highlighted sections I had carefully prepared. Jason stepped forward, trying to peek over the officer's shoulder. "This is a fake," Jason stammered, his confident facade finally cracking. "She is just a freelancer. She does not own a corporate entity. Tell her to move." The lead officer slowly folded the documents and handed them back to me. He turned to Jason, his sympathetic demeanor entirely gone. "Sir, these documents are legally binding," the officer said firmly. "This property belongs to an LLC, and she is the sole proprietor. You have no established tenancy here. If she wants you off the property, you have to leave. Now." Jason stared at the officer, his mouth opening and closing in pure shock. "You cannot be serious. You are throwing me out into the street. Where am I supposed to go?" "That is a civil matter, sir," the second officer chimed in, resting a hand near his duty belt. "But right now, you need to step off this private property, or we will be forced to arrest you for criminal trespassing." Jason's face twisted in absolute fury. The humiliation of being escorted away by the very police he called was eating him alive. He took a step backward, his hands balled into tight fists. He glared at me with pure hatred. You think you are so smart, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You think a piece of paper is going to save you. Fine. Keep the stupid house. But do not forget who brings in the real money. By noon today, I am freezing every single joint bank account we have. Let us see how long your little LLC survives when you cannot even afford to buy groceries. He spun around and stormed down the driveway. I simply closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and smiled. Let him freeze the accounts. The game had only just begun. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the adrenaline from the morning confrontation had faded into a cold, calculated focus. I needed to restock the kitchen. During the purge of Jason's belongings, I had thrown away all of his expensive imported protein powders, his craft beers, and the overpriced organic meals he insisted we keep stocked, but never actually ate. The refrigerator was practically empty save for some bottled water and half a loaf of bread. I drove to the upscale grocery market a few miles from my neighborhood. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon and the aisles were crowded with suburban couples shopping for weekend barbecues and dinner parties. I navigated my shopping cart through the produce section, methodically selecting fresh vegetables, lean meats, and a large bag of premium dark roast coffee. I was not operating out of panic. I was operating out of absolute clarity. My mind was already mapping out the legal fortifications of my intellectual property, but first I needed basic sustenance to keep my energy up. I reached the checkout lane and began placing my items on the moving conveyor belt. The teenage cashier scanned each item with practiced efficiency, bagging them neatly into reusable totes. The total came out to $214. I reached into my leather wallet and pulled out the platinum credit card linked to our joint account. I tapped it against the payment terminal. The machine beeped once, a sharp, flat tone, and the screen flashed red. Declined. I frowned slightly. That specific card had a $30,000 limit, and we paid the balance in full every single month. I figured it was just a temporary fraud alert. I had, after all, spent $3,000 on an emergency security contractor at 3 in the morning. Let me try another one, I told the cashier, keeping my voice perfectly light. I pulled out my debit card tied directly to our shared checking account where both of our monthly incomes were deposited. I inserted the metal chip. The screen spun for a few long seconds before flashing red again. Insufficient funds. The cashier looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. The line behind me was starting to grow. A woman holding a basket of organic avocados shifted her weight impatiently, sighing loudly enough for me to clearly hear. "Ma'am, do you have another form of payment?" the cashier asked, leaning over the register. "We can hold your bags at the customer service desk if you need to step aside and call your bank." I felt a brief hot flash of embarrassment, but I quickly pushed it down. Jason wanted me to feel humiliated. He wanted me to stand in a public place and feel the crushing weight of financial dependence. I was not going to give him the satisfaction of a public breakdown. "Please hold the bags," I said calmly. "I will be right back." I stepped out of the checkout lane and walked over to the quiet corner of the store near the floral department. I pulled out my phone and opened my mobile banking application. Face recognition logged me in, and the financial dashboard loaded. My stomach tightened instantly. The numbers on the screen were stark and completely unforgiving. Joint checking. Balance $0.00. Joint savings. Balance $0.00. Emergency fund. Balance $0.00. I clicked into the transaction history. Starting at exactly 9:15 that morning, less than an hour after the police escorted him off my property, Jason had initiated a series of aggressive wire transfers. He had moved over $80,000 in liquid cash to a private account under his sole name at a completely different banking institution. Following the transfers, he had called the credit card companies and reported the joint cards as stolen, freezing the accounts entirely. He had stripped the accounts bare. Every penny of our shared life, including the massive deposits I had made from my independent software development contracts, was gone. My phone vibrated heavily in my hand. A text message banner dropped down from the top of the screen. It was from Jason. I tapped the notification and opened the message thread. "Let us see how your little freelance hobby pays the bills now. You locked me out of the house. I locked you out of the world. Good luck buying dinner, Natalie." I stared at the glowing text message. He genuinely believed he had severed my lifeline. In his arrogant mind, my algorithm development was just a cute little hobby I did in my pajamas, while he was the brilliant corporate mastermind bringing in the real wealth. He forgot that I was the one who built the financial tracking software his entire startup relied on. He forgot that I understood banking architecture far better than his entire engineering team ever could. I closed the text thread without replying. I opened a secondary banking application on my phone, one linked exclusively to my corporate entity, the very same limited liability company that owned my house. The balance was healthy, completely untouched, and legally untouchable by him. I walked back to the customer service desk, pulled out my sleek black corporate card, and paid for my groceries. Jason thought he had starved me out. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you underestimate the architect of your entire empire. I pulled into my driveway, the grocery bags sitting securely in the passenger seat. The house was quiet, the new deadbolts gleaming in the afternoon sun. I carried the bags inside and began organizing the refrigerator, enjoying the methodical process of taking inventory. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos Jason had tried to inflict on me. Just as I was putting away the last bag of coffee beans, the sharp chime of the doorbell echoed heavily through the hallway. I checked the tablet monitor. It was not Jason returning for a second attempt. Instead, a man in a crisp uniform stood on the porch, holding a thick, rigid cardboard envelope. He had a digital clipboard in his other hand. I walked to the door, leaving the security chain engaged, and opened it just enough to speak. He asked for me by my full legal name. I confirmed my identity, unchained the door, and signed his digital screen. He handed me the heavy envelope and walked back to an unmarked courier van. I carried the package to the kitchen island. The return address was printed in raised gold lettering. It was from one of the most expensive and aggressive corporate litigation firms in Manhattan, a firm known for destroying small businesses on behalf of massive conglomerates. I slid a knife under the flap and pulled out a stack of dense, legal-sized paper. The header read "Cease and Desist," followed by a formal notice of intent to sue. I spread the pages across the granite counter. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation drafted and rushed out on a Saturday afternoon, which meant someone had paid an exorbitant emergency retainer. The document stated that I had engaged in harassing behavior at the Grand Fairmont Hotel. It accused me of attempting to extort Jason and his business associates. But the real target of the letter was clear in the third paragraph. Cassidy had directed her legal team to threaten me with immediate financial ruin. The letter explicitly forbade me from posting any details about the gala Jason or Cassidy on any social media platform. It prohibited me from contacting any employees or investors associated with Jason's startup or Cassidy Venture Capital Fund. If I violated these terms, they promised to file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for defamation and tortious interference with prospective business relations. They threatened to freeze my remaining personal assets, garnish any future wages I earned from my freelance development contracts, and bury me in so many legal fees that I would never recover. It was a classic display of overwhelming financial dominance. Cassidy was using her wealth to build a legal fortress around Jason, treating me like an annoying pest that could be swatted away with a simple signature. She assumed that an independent developer working from home would take one look at the letterhead of a billion-dollar law firm and immediately surrender. She wanted me terrified, quiet, and completely compliant. I read through the dense legal threats a second time, but my heart rate did not elevate. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Cassidy thought this letter was a display of ultimate power. To me, it was a glaring beacon of extreme vulnerability. If Cassidy genuinely believed I was just a crazy, irrelevant ex-wife, she would have simply ignored me. High-powered venture capitalists do not spend $10,000 on emergency weekend legal fees to silence a nobody. They only deploy these aggressive tactics when they are deeply afraid of a deal falling apart. The Series A funding round for Jason's startup was clearly in its final, most sensitive stage. The investors were on edge. The slightest hint of scandal or instability surrounding the chief executive officer could cause the entire $20 million deal to instantly collapse. Cassidy was not just protecting her new toy, she was protecting her own professional reputation and her massive financial investment. By sending this heavy-handed threat, she had inadvertently shown me her exact pressure point. She had handed me the blueprint to her own destruction. I gathered the heavy legal documents, tapped them neatly against the counter, and dropped them directly into the trash can. I did not need to post anything on social media. I did not need to run to the press or cry to my friends. I had something far more destructive than gossip. I walked into my home office, booted up my workstation, and smiled at the glowing screens. The expensive legal threats meant absolutely nothing because Cassidy was trying to protect a $20 million digital castle built entirely on my intellectual property. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard as I opened the encrypted source code repositories for my proprietary algorithm. I needed to verify that all my access logs were perfectly documented for the upcoming legal storm. Just as I initiated a full backup of the main server, my cell phone began vibrating violently against the solid wooden desk. The caller identification flashed with a picture of Brittany. She was Jason's older sister, a woman whose entire personality revolved around expensive country club memberships and pretending her family came from old money. I took a deep, steadying breath, pressed the green accept button, and put the call directly on speakerphone. I did not even get the chance to say hello. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the walls of my quiet home office. "You locked my brother out of his own house like a common criminal. You are a spiteful, jealous little girl. Jason is about to close a $20 million funding round with Cassidy firm, and you are acting like an absolute lunatic just because he finally realized he needs a sophisticated woman on his level. You are trying to sabotage the biggest moment of his entire life." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched the backup progress bar slowly fill the screen. "Brittany," I said calmly, keeping my emotions completely locked down. "Your brother brought his wealthy mistress to a professional networking gala and publicly humiliated me in front of industry leaders. I simply changed the locks on a property that I solely own." "You do not own anything," she snapped back immediately, her tone dripping with intense elitism. "You are just a glorified computer repair technician who works in sweatpants." Jason is a visionary chief executive officer. His corporate lawyers are drafting a rapid divorce settlement right now. You are going to sign it the second it arrives in your inbox. If you try to drag this out and ruin his Series A funding with your pathetic emotional drama, I swear I will personally make sure you never work in this state again. We are not going to let a desperate gold digger destroy my family legacy and ruin his massive opportunity. A gold digger! I repeated, letting out a short, genuine laugh that seemed to make her even angrier. Brittany, when Jason decided to quit his stable corporate job to play tech founder 4 years ago, he had $0 to his name. I emptied my entire life savings to pay the rent on his very first office space. I bought the servers. I paid his internet bills. I worked 80-hour weeks taking terrible freelance coding jobs to keep food on our table while he networked at golf courses. I built the very financial foundation of his so-called legacy when nobody else believed in him. "That was barely a contribution," Brittany scoffed loudly, completely dismissing my years of brutal sacrifice. "You paid for a few months of cheap rent and some basic computer parts. Big deal. Jason is the one with the raw charisma. Jason is the one who secured the meetings with the venture capitalists. He built the brand from nothing. You are just trying to extort him now because you see the massive valuation he achieved. Cassidy is investing $20 million in his genius mind, not your little freelance hobby. You are going to take whatever minimal settlement his lawyers offer, and you are going to walk away quietly like a good girl." I stared at the blinking cursor on my computer monitor. The sheer delusion was almost impressive to witness. Brittany genuinely believed her brother was a self-made tech prodigy. She had no idea that the core technology Cassidy was about to invest in was actually written entirely by the woman she was currently screaming at over the phone. Jason had lied to everyone, including his own family, about where the algorithm actually came from. "I will not be signing any expedited settlement," I told her, my voice dropping to a cold, flat register that left no room for debate. "And you can tell Jason that freezing my bank accounts and sending aggressive legal letters will not work." If he wants a divorce, he can face me in a formal mediation room with full financial disclosures. You are making a massive mistake, Natalie, Brittany growled venomously. Cassidy has the power to crush you. Nobody in this family supports you. We always knew you were worthless trash. I reached forward and tapped the red button, cutting off her unhinged rant. Let them think they had cornered me. They were walking blindly into a trap. I ended the call with Brittany and tossed my phone onto the desk. The silence in my home office was thick, broken only by the quiet hum of my computer tower finishing its backup sequence. I sat there for a moment processing her hateful words. The sheer arrogance of Jason's family was astounding. They truly believed I was a helpless variable they could easily delete from the equation of his success. I turned back to my monitors and pulled up my personal email client. I needed to email my lawyer a summary of Jason's financial blockades and the ridiculous cease and desist letter Cassidy had sent. I started typing out the timeline of events detailing the frozen bank accounts and the aggressive legal threats. Just as I was about to hit send, a new message popped into my main inbox. It was not from my lawyer, nor was it another threat from Cassidy's legal team. The sender address was a jumble of random alphanumeric characters registered through a highly secure encrypted Swiss email provider. The subject line was completely blank. I hesitated. Opening emails from unknown encrypted sources was terrible cybersecurity hygiene, especially when I was actively engaged in a hostile separation with a tech startup CEO. My first instinct was to delete it immediately, assuming it was a phishing attempt from Jason trying to gain access to my servers. But something about the timing felt too deliberate. If Jason wanted to hack me, he would have used a more sophisticated vector than a blank email to my primary account. I routed my connection through a secure virtual private network and opened the message in a sandboxed environment, isolating it from my main system. The body of the email contained only two things. The first was a zip file attachment named simply with that day's date. The second was a single 10-digit phone number with a local area code followed by a short line of text. Call this number from a burner phone. The password to the file is the name of the street where Jason parked his first server rack. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Very few people knew the origin story of Jason's startup, and even fewer knew the specific details of our early struggles. When Jason first started building his company before the sleek corporate offices and the venture capital meetings, we could not afford cloud hosting. We had bought a cheap second-hand server rack from a failing local business. Because our tiny apartment did not have the space or the cooling capacity, we had convinced a friend to let us store it in their dusty basement garage. That garage was located on Elmwood Avenue. I quickly downloaded the zip file to my isolated desktop. I double-clicked the icon, and a password prompt appeared. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed in Elmwood, making sure to capitalize the first letter. I hit enter. The prompt disappeared and the zip file extracted instantly, revealing a folder packed with PDF documents, Excel spreadsheets, and dozens of high-resolution images. I did not open them yet. My eyes darted back to the 10-digit phone number in the email. Whoever sent this knew intimate details about our past, and they were actively trying to bypass Jason's surveillance. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, pushing aside old charging cables and spare hard drives until I found what I was looking for. A cheap prepaid cell phone I had bought months ago for a specific software testing project and had never used since. I plugged it in, waiting impatiently for the battery icon to appear. Once it had enough charge, I powered it on. I dialed the number from the email, holding the plastic phone to my ear. It rang twice before the line clicked open. There was a heavy pause. I could hear faint traffic noise in the background. "Hello?" I said cautiously, keeping my voice low. A deep, familiar voice answered the tone, tense and rushed. "Natalie. Thank God you called." I recognized the voice instantly. It was DeAndre. "DeAndre," I asked, completely shocked. "What is going on? Why are you contacting me through an encrypted email?" He let out a harsh, bitter exhale. "I am using a burner phone too. I had to make sure Jason and Brittany could not trace this conversation. I heard what Brittany said to you on the phone. She was bragging about it to Jason in the kitchen. They think they have you completely trapped. Why are you helping me? I asked, genuinely confused. DeAndre was Brittany's husband. He was an incredibly sharp forensic accountant who usually kept his head down and avoided his wife's toxic family drama. He was the only person in that family I had ever truly respected, a quiet, brilliant man who seemed just as out of place among their elitist posturing as I was. Because I am sick of watching them destroy people, DeAndre replied, his voice tightening with suppressed anger. I am sick of the lies, the manipulation, and the blatant racism they think they hide so well. They treat you like garbage, Natalie. And they treat me like an accessory. I cannot sit by and watch them steal your life's work while pretending Jason is some kind of genius. My stomach dropped. Steal my life's work? DeAndre, what exactly did you send me in that zip file? He paused for a second. Do not worry about the frozen checking accounts or the legal letters from that VC firm. You need to look at the corporate tax returns and the investor disclosures I just sent you. I dug into Jason's internal financials. He is not just seeking funding, Natalie. He is actively committing federal fraud. Federal fraud. I repeated, the weight of the words settling heavily into the quiet room. DeAndre, you are a certified forensic accountant. If you are saying he is committing federal fraud, that means you have paper trails. How did you even get access to his internal company financials? Jason practically handed them to me, DeAndre said, a dry, humorless chuckle coming through the speaker. He came to my house last week in a complete panic. Cassidy and her venture capital team are pushing for an expedited due diligence process to close the $20 million funding round. Jason knew his books were a complete mess. He asked me to quietly review the cap table and the financial disclosures to make sure there were no red flags before Cassidy auditors tore into them. He actually thought I would just rubber stamp his documents to protect the family name. And you found something else instead? I prompted, moving my computer mouse to double-click the first PDF document in the folder he had sent. I found a financial massacre, Natalie. DeAndre replied, his voice dropping an octave, turning deadly serious. Jason has been running that startup like a personal piggy bank. He has been taking the seed money from his initial angel investors and using it to fund his ridiculous lifestyle. The luxury car leases, the expensive hotel suites, the custom suits. He has been categorizing them as vital research and development expenses. But that is not even the worst part. Open the document labeled Schedule C Disclosures. I scrolled through the extracted folder and found the file. I double-clicked it, and a highly detailed corporate tax schedule filled my monitor. I scanned the rows of numbers and legal descriptions. Look at line item 42, DeAndre instructed. I moved my eyes down the page. Line 42 was a declaration of intellectual property assets. Beside it was a valuation of $5 million, listed as a direct capital contribution from the founding chief executive officer. Underneath the valuation was a detailed technical description of the proprietary data processing algorithm. My algorithm. The code I had spent 3 years writing in this exact room. He is claiming my software as his personal capital contribution. I said, my voice barely above a whisper, as the sheer audacity of his lie washed over me. Keep reading, DeAndre urged. Look at the attached exhibits on the next page. I scrolled down. Attached to the tax return was a poorly photocopied intellectual property transfer agreement. It stated that I, Natalie, had willingly surrendered all rights, titles, and interests in the algorithm to Jason Holding Company for the sum of $1. At the bottom of the page was my signature. My blood turned to ice. That is a forged signature, I said, leaning closer to the screen. I never signed this document. I never even saw this document. DeAndre, he forged my name on a federal tax disclosure to secure venture capital funding. Exactly, DeAndre said sharply. Jason knows he cannot write a single line of viable code. He knows your algorithm is the only reason his company has any actual market value. When Cassidy investors demanded proof that the startup owned the core technology outright, Jason panicked. He forged that transfer agreement and filed it with the IRS to make his corporate valuation look legitimate. If Cassidy Fund acquires a percentage of his company based on these forged documents, Jason is committing massive wire fraud and securities fraud. I sat back in my chair staring at the fake signature. Jason was not just an arrogant cheat. He was a desperate criminal standing on a house of cards. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked softly. "Brittany is your wife. If Jason goes down for this, the scandal will drag her name through the mud too. She will never forgive you." DeAndre let out a long, heavy sigh. "Brittany and I have been over for a long time, Natalie. You do not see what happens behind closed doors. You do not hear the comments her parents make about me when they think I am not listening. They parade me around their country club dinners to look progressive, but they treat me like a subordinate. I am just a prop to them. They look down on me the exact same way they look down on you. I am preparing my own exit strategy, but when I saw Jason actively trying to steal your life work and leave you bankrupt, I drew the line. You built that tech. It belongs to you." I felt a sudden overwhelming wave of gratitude for the man on the other end of the phone. While Jason family was busy trying to destroy me, the one person they marginalized the most had just handed me the ultimate weapon. "What is our next move?" I asked, feeling a fierce, cold energy replacing my exhaustion. "Jason lawyers scheduled a divorce mediation for Tuesday," DeAndre said quickly. "He wants to force you into a quick settlement and make you sign a blanket non-disclosure agreement before the Friday signing ceremony with Cassidy. He is terrified you will blow up his deal. Go to the mediation. Let him play his games. Let him think he is winning. Do not mention the forged documents. Do not mention the fraud. Let him lock himself into his own lies on the legal record." I looked at the forged signature on my screen, then down at the burner phone in my hand. "I will see him on Tuesday," I promised. "And DeAndre, thank you." "I will keep digging on my end," he replied. "Stay sharp, Natalie." The line clicked dead. I placed the phone gently on the desk. Jason thought freezing my checking account would break my spirit. He had no idea I was about to freeze his entire future. I sat in the glow of my monitors for hours after DeAndre hung up the phone. The forged tax document was just the first layer of Jason's deception. I needed to see exactly how far the lies went. I opened the next subfolder inside the encrypted zip file. It was labeled Technical Due Diligence. These were the exact documents Jason had submitted to Cassidy's venture capital firm to justify the massive $20 million valuation. I clicked open the master system architecture file, my hand gripping the mouse tightly. My stomach churned as I read the first page. Jason had literally copied and pasted the entire technical breakdown from my private code repository. He had taken the intricate neural network models I designed to predict market volatility, the very modules I had spent holidays and weekends perfecting, and slapped his own corporate logo right on top of my schematics. But what made my blood boil was the sheer insulting laziness of his theft. He had executed a clumsy search and replace function across the document, changing the name of my independent limited liability company to the name of his startup. He was so rushed and technically illiterate that he completely ruined the formatting of the mathematical equations in the process. He had fundamentally altered the syntax of the core algorithm in the presentation, rendering the code logically impossible. Any competent software engineer looking at this document would instantly see that the system described could not actually function. But Cassidy and her massive team of highly paid venture capital analysts had not noticed a single thing, proving their due diligence was an absolute sham. They were completely blinded by Jason's aggressive sales pitch and his manufactured Silicon Valley charm. Cassidy was so eager to close the deal and claim her trophy investment that she had completely neglected her professional obligation to run a proper technical audit. She was preparing to invest $20 million of her client's money into a black box that neither she nor Jason actually understood. The ultimate betrayal was not just that he stole my work, it was that he thought my work was nothing more than a prop for his ego. He had watched me pull all-nighters for 3 years, writing tens of thousands of lines of code while he attended luxury networking retreats on my dime. He had dismissed my business as a cute freelance hobby to his family, while secretly building his entire corporate empire on my unpaid labor. He genuinely believed that because I was his wife, my intellectual property automatically belonged to him. He thought he could forge one single document and completely rewrite history. I closed the PDF viewer and opened a secure web browser. I navigated directly to the official portal for the United States Copyright Office and the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Jason had made one catastrophic miscalculation in his grand scheme. He assumed I was as careless and arrogant with my business as he was with his. 3 years ago, when I first finalized the underlying logic of the algorithm, I did not just save it to a local hard drive and hope for the best. I legally registered the source code. I filed the utility patents under my corporate entity. I paid the heavy federal filing fees using the money I made from my independent consulting contracts. I logged into my secure federal portal and navigated to my active portfolio. I downloaded the digitally certified time-stamped certificates. The official government seals glowed brightly on my screen, legally proving that my company had exclusive ownership of the algorithm years before Jason even incorporated his startup. I sent the high-resolution files to my secure laser printer. I watched the machine spit out the crisp, heavy pages containing the undeniable proof of my ownership, stacking them neatly on the glass desk. Every single page represented a nail in the coffin of his fragile, stolen empire. I organized the freshly printed certificates into a sleek black leather folder, placing them right next to the forged tax document DeAndre had provided. I ran my fingers over the textured leather cover, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. The anxiety and exhaustion from the hotel gala had completely vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp tactical clarity. Tuesday was approaching quickly. Jason and his expensive corporate lawyers thought they were walking into a family mediation room to bully a financially ruined, emotionally shattered housewife into submission. They thought freezing my bank accounts would leave me defenseless and desperate for their pathetic settlement offer. They were completely wrong. They were actually walking straight into a legally sealed vault entirely built by the woman they underestimated, and I was holding the only key. Tuesday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky that perfectly matched the sterile atmosphere of the downtown mediation center. I walked into the conference room wearing a tailored navy suit I had bought years ago for client pitches. I sat on one side of the long mahogany table, flanked by a modest but incredibly sharp attorney I had hired using the funds from my corporate account. The door opened precisely at 10 o'clock. Jason strutted in, projecting an aura of overwhelming success. He was wearing a custom Italian suit, and a heavy gold watch gleamed on his wrist. Right behind him was Cassidy's high-powered corporate lawyer, a man who looked like he billed $1,000 an hour just to breathe the air in the room. Jason did not even look at me. He pulled out his chair, unbuttoned his suit jacket, and sat down with a heavy sigh, acting like he was doing me a massive favor just by being physically present. His lawyer immediately opened a thick leather briefcase and slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood toward me. "Good morning," the lawyer began, his voice slick and condescending. "We are here to finalize this separation as quickly and painlessly as possible. My client recognizes that you have had a difficult week. To help you transition into your new living situation, my client is prepared to offer you a lump sum alimony payment of $50,000. I looked down at the paper. It was a check made out to me for $50,000, but attached beneath it was a dense 3-page legal document. In exchange for this generous financial support, the lawyer continued smoothly, "You will sign this comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. This document strictly prohibits you from discussing my client, his personal relationships, or his corporate entity with anyone. Furthermore, it includes a complete waiver of any and all rights claims or perceived interests in my client's startup. We understand you occasionally helped with some minor administrative tasks during the company's early days, but this waiver ensures a clean break." I stared at the check. $50,000. It was a pathetic fraction of the $20 million valuation he was about to secure. It was less than what he spent on the luxury car he had leased using his stolen startup funds. He honestly thought he could buy my silence and my life's work for the price of a mid-sized sedan. Jason finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked at me with an expression of deep manufactured pity. "Take the deal, Natalie," he said, his tone dripping with patronizing arrogance. "I am trying to be fair here, I really am. But you have to be realistic. You are 33 years old. You work from home in your pajamas doing freelance coding gigs. You do not understand the pressure of running a massive tech empire. You do not understand the complexities of venture capital or series funding. I am moving into a totally different tax bracket, a completely different world. You need this $50,000 to get an apartment and figure out your life." I kept my face completely blank, refusing to let the anger show. He was sitting across from me, a man whose entire corporate identity was built on a forged tax document, lecturing me about the complexities of the tech industry. He was trying to buy the algorithm I created, using the very same venture capital money he was trying to secure with my algorithm. The circular logic of his fraud was staggering. My attorney leaned over and whispered in my ear, asking if we should present the intellectual property certificates. I shook my head slightly. No. DeAndre had warned me. I needed Jason to fully commit to his lies on the official legal record. I needed him to definitively claim ownership before I detonated the bomb. I looked back at Jason. $50,000, I repeated slowly, letting the number hang in the air. And you want me to waive all rights to the startup? Jason, are you absolutely certain that you own all the intellectual property associated with your company? Jason rolled his eyes, letting out an exasperated sigh. Are we really doing this right now? Yes, Natalie, I own the company. I wrote the business plan. I secured the investors. The proprietary algorithm driving our predictive modeling was developed entirely by me and my team. It is my intellectual property. Why do you think Cassidy's fund is valuing us at $20 million? It is because of my vision. Are you stating that for the official mediation record, my attorney interjected, tapping a pen against her legal pad, that your client claims sole authorship and ownership of the core algorithm? Jason's lawyer nodded firmly. Absolutely. We have filed all necessary documentation with the IRS and our investors confirming my client's sole ownership. The intellectual property is securely held by his corporate entity. This is not up for debate. I felt a cold smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. He had just trapped himself. He had verbally confirmed the fraud in front of two legal professionals, cementing his claim to the stolen technology. I picked up the pen lying next to the agreement. I held it for a second, feeling the heavy gaze of Jason and his lawyer, both of them expecting me to sign away my life. Instead, I carefully placed the pen down and pushed the documents back across the table. "I decline your offer," I said clearly, my voice ringing off the walls of the small room. "I will not sign the non-disclosure agreement, and I absolutely will not waive my rights to the startup." Jason's face instantly darkened. The smug confidence vanished, replaced by an ugly defensive rage. "You are making a huge mistake," he hissed, leaning across the table. "You think you can extort me for more money. You have nothing. I froze your accounts. You cannot even afford to fight me in court. You are going to walk out of here with zero." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. "I am comfortable with my decision," I replied calmly. "We will see you in court, Jason. Or perhaps somewhere else entirely." I turned and walked out of the mediation room, leaving the $50,000 check sitting on the table. He thought I was walking away empty-handed. He had no idea I was walking away with everything I needed to destroy him. My hand was resting heavily on the cold brass doorknob when a new voice cut through the tense air of the mediation room. "Hold on a minute, sweetheart." I stopped and turned around. Sitting in the far corner of the room, partially obscured by the shadows of the heavy window blinds, was Cassidy. She had been sitting there in complete silence the entire time, acting as a so-called board observer for her venture capital firm. It was a blatant intimidation tactic, a deliberate way to remind me of the massive financial machine backing Jason. She uncrossed her legs, stood up, and walked slowly toward the center of the mahogany table, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. You are making a very dramatic exit, Cassidy said, a condescending smirk playing on her perfectly painted lips. But let us strip away the emotion and look at the reality. You are rejecting $50,000 because your pride is hurt. You think you can stall his funding round by throwing a tantrum over a software program you barely understand. I let go of the doorknob and took 2 steps back into the room. I looked right past Cassidy and locked eyes with Jason, who was suddenly looking incredibly nervous. A software program I barely understand, I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Jason, since you just stated on the official legal record that you are the sole creator of the predictive algorithm, why do you not explain it to your lead investor right now? Explain the core logic to her. Jason swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward his expensive lawyer, then back to me. I do not have to explain anything to you, Natalie. This is a legal mediation, not a technical seminar. I took another step forward, closing the distance. I am not asking for a seminar, Jason. I am asking a basic structural question about the asset you are selling for $20 million. Tell Cassidy how you configured the recurrent neural network to handle the asymmetric datasets. Did you use a standard gradient descent? Or did you write a custom optimization function to prevent the exploding gradient problem we discussed last year? The room went dead silent. Jason opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face flushed a deep, uncomfortable red. He adjusted his silk tie, looking exactly like a trapped animal caught in the headlights. Well, he stammered, his voice entirely lacking its previous arrogant boom. The neural network is fully optimized for cloud integration. We use a highly agile framework to ensure maximum synergy across the data streams. The architecture is proprietary, obviously, so I am not going to discuss the granular plumbing of the code with someone who is no longer affiliated with the company. It was a spectacular collapse. He had just thrown together a handful of meaningless corporate buzzwords that had absolutely nothing to do with machine learning or algorithm optimization. Any freshman computer science student would have laughed him out of the room. I looked at his lawyer, who was suddenly staring very intently at his blank legal pad. I looked at my own attorney, who gave me a subtle, knowing nod. Synergy across the data streams, I echoed, allowing a sharp, genuine laugh to escape my chest. That does not even mean anything, Jason. You cannot answer the question because you do not know the answer. You do not know the answer because you did not write a single line of that code. Cassidy stepped forcefully between Jason and me, her eyes flashing with sudden defensive anger. She had heard his fumbling answer, but her massive ego refused to process the obvious truth. She had already committed her professional reputation to this deal. Acknowledging that her tech founder was a total fraud would mean admitting she had failed at her job. Enough, Cassidy snapped, raising her hand dismissively. I am not going to stand here and listen to a bitter, uneducated ex-wife try to interrogate my chief executive officer. Jason is a visionary. He manages the big picture. He does not need to memorize every line of granular code like some low-level data entry clerk. That is what he hires people to do. She stepped closer to me, lowering her voice into a cold, venomous whisper. You are trying to extort us, Natalie. You are trying to use big words to cast doubt on a deal that is moving forward with or without you. You think you are playing a smart game, but you are completely out of your depth. You just threw away $50,000. When my legal team is finished with you, you will be begging to clean the floors of my office building. I looked at Cassidy, marveling at the sheer blindness of her arrogance. She was actively defending the man who was about to destroy her career. I do not want your money, Cassidy, I said, my voice perfectly steady. And Jason is not a visionary. He is a liability. I turned around, opened the heavy wooden door, and walked out into the brightly lit hallway. I did not look back. I had given them every opportunity to tell the truth. I had given Cassidy a glaring red flag about her investment. They had chosen to double down on their lies. Now there was absolutely nothing standing between them and the devastating legal trap I had set. I walked out of the mediation center and into the cool afternoon air. The heavy gray clouds from this morning had finally broken, allowing bright rays of sunlight to hit the concrete pavement. My attorney walked beside me, her heels clicking rhythmically against the sidewalk. She adjusted the strap of her briefcase and looked at me with a mixture of professional concern and quiet respect. She asked if I was absolutely certain about rejecting the settlement offer. She reminded me that going up against a venture capital firm with practically unlimited legal resources could be a brutal process. I simply smiled, thanked her for her excellent counsel, and told her my legal strategy was about to shift into a much higher gear. I did not need her to fight Cassidy in a civil courtroom. I was taking this to the federal level. I drove back to my house in complete silence. There was no panic, no lingering anxiety, and no doubt in my mind. Jason thought my refusal to sign the non-disclosure agreement was just a desperate plea for a larger payout. Cassidy genuinely believed I was a bitter, uneducated ex-wife throwing a tantrum. Neither of them realized that their towering arrogance in that conference room had given me the exact confirmation I needed. Jason had officially and aggressively claimed ownership of the intellectual property on the legal record. He had locked himself into his own lie. I stepped inside my house, engaged the heavy deadbolts, and walked straight into my home office. I fired up my secure workstation, routing my connection through an encrypted virtual private network. I opened the digital folder containing the files DeAndre had sent me over the burner phone. The forensic accounting trail DeAndre had compiled was absolutely beautiful in its precision. He had systematically highlighted every single fraudulent transaction Jason had made over the past 2 years. The seed money meant for critical server infrastructure had been quietly diverted to pay for Jason's luxury sports car lease. The initial angel investments, which were legally earmarked for engineering payroll, had been drained to fund expensive hotel suites, high-end steakhouse dinners, and custom-tailored Italian suits. Jason was using his startup like a personal slush fund to maintain the illusion of massive success. But the undeniable crown jewel of his criminal negligence was the forged tax document claiming my predictive algorithm as his own capital contribution. I opened a secure browser session and navigated directly to the official website of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC takes corporate fraud incredibly seriously, especially when a startup is actively circulating falsified documents to secure a $20 million Series A funding round. I accessed their online whistleblower reporting portal. The screen glowed with stark federal warnings about the penalties for submitting false information. I felt a surge of cold adrenaline as I began typing. I filled out the electronic forms meticulously. I detailed the exact nature of the securities fraud, explaining step by step how the chief executive officer was presenting stolen intellectual property as a core corporate asset to intentionally deceive venture capitalists and institutional investors. I uploaded the forged IRS Schedule C document. I attached the copied technical due diligence reports where Jason had clumsily pasted his logo over my code. I included the highlighted bank transfer logs showing the blatant misappropriation of early investor funds. After the SEC portal generated a secure confirmation number, I immediately moved over to the Internal Revenue Service fraud reporting system. I filed a separate, highly detailed report regarding the forged signature on the intellectual property transfer agreement. I did not use my real name for these initial submissions. I filed them anonymously through a secure legal proxy service. I did not want Cassidy using her massive wealth and political connections to tie me up in retaliatory civil litigation before the federal agencies had a chance to process the raw data. The evidence was irrefutable, and it needed to speak entirely for itself without my personal identity muddying the waters. I moved my mouse over the final submit button. I did not hesitate for a single second. I clicked it. The digital confirmation receipts appeared brightly on my screen. I printed physical copies of the submission codes and placed them carefully into the black leather folder sitting on my desk, right next to my official copyright certificates. The silent strike had been officially launched. Somewhere downtown, Jason and Cassidy were probably celebrating their supposed victory in the mediation room. They were likely finalizing the catering menu for their massive corporate signing party. They had absolutely no idea that highly trained federal investigators were about to receive a perfectly organized roadmap to their complete destruction. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and took a deep, satisfying breath. The financial bomb was ticking. It was only a matter of time before the shockwave ripped their empire apart. Wednesday morning began with a false sense of triumph for Jason. I imagined him sitting in his sleek corner office overlooking the city, sipping an expensive espresso, completely convinced that he had won the war. The $20 million signing ceremony was only 48 hours away. But at exactly 10 in the morning, the illusion shattered. A registered courier arrived at his startup headquarters, carrying a thick official envelope bearing the seal of the Internal Revenue Service. It was an expedited notice of inquiry. The federal agency was demanding an immediate preliminary audit of the company financial disclosures, specifically citing irregularities in the early investor capital allocations and the recent intellectual property transfer declarations. Jason opened the letter, and his blood must have turned completely to ice. This was not a routine annual review. This was a targeted, aggressive inquiry demanding documentation he simply did not possess. He read the dense federal statutes printed on the page twice, his hands shaking violently. The panic set in instantly. He knew exactly what the IRS was looking for, and he knew they would easily find the massive holes in his accounting. He bypassed his chief financial officer, entirely terrified that his own employees would discover he had been using the startup accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle. Instead, he locked his office door, pulled out his personal phone, and dialed his sister. Brittany answered from her country club patio, expecting a celebratory update about the divorce mediation. Jason cut her off immediately. His voice was frantic as he ordered her to start moving the luxury assets he had secretly parked under her name. He told her to instantly transfer the title of the sports car and empty the offshore holding account he had used to hide his diverted seed money. Brittany, who had spent the last 3 years bragging to her wealthy friends about her genius brother, suddenly found herself roped directly into a federal tax evasion scheme. She argued loudly, her shrill voice echoing through the phone receiver, demanding to know why she was suddenly involved. She asked if she was going to jail. Jason slammed his fist against the desk, telling her she was fine if she followed his instructions perfectly. He screamed at her to stop asking questions and just do exactly what he said before federal agents started knocking on her pristine suburban door. The toxic family loyalty they prided themselves on was suddenly collapsing under the massive weight of sheer terror. Just as Jason was hanging up with his sister, his main office line rang. It was Cassidy. Her venture capital analysts had caught wind of the IRS inquiry through the shared corporate data room notifications. Jason completely froze, expecting her to immediately pull the plug on the entire $20 million deal. He gripped the edge of his mahogany desk and braced himself for a massive screaming fit, his mind racing to invent a desperate, plausible excuse. But Cassidy did not yell. In fact, she sounded completely calm, almost annoyed by the minor inconvenience. She told Jason to take a deep breath and stop acting like a terrified amateur. In her exceptionally arrogant mind, this was just a random bureaucratic glitch, a tiny speed bump caused by an overzealous government clerk right before a major corporate transaction. Cassidy assured Jason that she handled these kinds of frustrating regulatory annoyances all the time. She loudly bragged about her extensive political capital and her firm, deep connections within the highest levels of the financial sector. She proudly instructed her elite team of corporate lawyers to file an immediate injunction to stall the inquiry, using the pending series funding as leverage to request a 60-day administrative extension. By late Wednesday afternoon, Cassidy had successfully delayed the initial audit. She called Jason back triumphantly, informing him that the coast was entirely clear for Friday. Jason slumped back heavily in his leather executive chair, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead, genuinely believing he had just dodged a massive bullet. He praised Cassidy, feeding her massive ego, telling her she was an absolute savior. Cassidy soaked up the praise, completely convinced she had just protected her brilliant tech investment from a clumsy, inefficient government system. Neither of them realized the profound mistake they had just made. By using her massive firm resources to actively obstruct and delay a legitimate federal whistleblower investigation, Cassidy had just officially tied her own professional noose right next to his. They thought they had outsmarted the federal government. I was watching the entire digital trail unfold from my home office, Every single frantic action they took was being carefully documented and added to my expanding evidence file. They had actually just bought me the exact window of time I needed to completely destroy them. Thursday morning arrived with a tense, heavy atmosphere. It was the day before the massive Series A signing ceremony. I was sitting at a small corner table in my favorite artisanal coffee shop, the glowing screen of my laptop open to a secure server terminal. I was quietly compiling the final data logs for the federal investigators when the bell above the glass door chimed sharply. I did not need to look up to know who had just walked in. The sharp clicking of expensive designer heels against the rustic wooden floor announced her arrival. Cassidy marched straight toward my table. She looked completely out of place in the quiet suburban cafe, wearing a tailored white trench coat and oversized dark sunglasses. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down without asking. I slowly closed my laptop, my face completely expressionless. I reached down and casually placed my cell phone face down on the wooden table right between us. With a subtle swipe of my thumb, I activated the voice recording application. Cassidy took off her sunglasses and tossed them onto the table. The polite professional facade she had worn during the mediation was entirely gone. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with deep irritation. "You have been very busy," Natalie Cassidy said, her voice low and sharp. "That little stunt with the IRS yesterday was incredibly annoying. I suppose I underestimated your capacity for petty revenge. You actually thought a random anonymous tip about his tax filings would blow up my deal." I did not confirm or deny her accusation. I just let the silence stretch, forcing her to fill the void. My lack of reaction seemed to infuriate her even more. Cassidy sighed heavily, crossing her arms over her chest. "I spent the last 24 hours dealing with federal bureaucrats to delay an audit that never should have happened. Jason thought offering you $50,000 would make you go away. I told him he was being naive. I know how people like you operate. You saw the $20 million valuation and decided you wanted a bigger piece of the pie before the window closed." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound checkbook. She clicked a heavy gold pen, scribbled a number across the paper with aggressive, rapid strokes, and tore the check from the binding. She slid it across the table until it touched the edge of my laptop. I looked down. It was a cashier's check made out directly to me. $500,000. $500,000, Cassidy said, leaning back in her chair with a smug, victorious smile. "That is 10 times what Jason offered you. That is enough money for you to buy a new house in cash, start a new life, and pretend you never met him. But it comes with a non-negotiable condition. You disappear today. No more calls to regulatory agencies, no more showing up at my networking events, and absolutely no more claiming ownership of his software." I stared at the check, keeping my voice deliberately soft and hesitant, playing the exact role of the overwhelmed victim she expected me to be. "If Jason really owns the technology, why are you offering me $500,000? I asked, looking up at her. "Are you actually worried about the federal audit?" Cassidy let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. She took the bait completely. "Grow up, Natalie." Cassidy scoffed, leaning across the table, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "This is how the real world works. Do you really think I do not know Jason is a sloppy executive? I have seen his internal ledgers. His books are a complete disaster. He mismanaged his early seed capital, and there are glaring financial irregularities all over his capital allocations. He treats his startup like a personal slush fund." "Then why are you investing $20 million into a fraudulent company?" I pressed, making sure my phone microphone picked up every single word. "Because the core predictive algorithm is a gold mine," Cassidy stated arrogantly, completely unaware that she was confessing to a massive crime. "Once my firm injects $20 million in clean cash into his corporate accounts tomorrow, we can retroactively balance his books. We will bury his sloppy spending, rewrite the capital allocations, and make those financial irregularities completely disappear before the auditors ever get the chance to look at the real ledgers in 60 days. We just needed to stall the federal inquiry long enough to close the deal. So take the money, Natalie. Take the money and walk away, or my firm will ensure you never write another line of code in this industry again." I did not flinch. I reached out and calmly picked up my phone. I stopped the recording, saved the audio file to my secure cloud server, and slipped the device into my pocket. I looked at the massive check, then looked Cassidy directly in the eyes. $500,000 is a very generous valuation for orchestrating a federal cover-up, I said smoothly. But it is not quite enough to buy my silence. I stood up, grabbed my laptop bag, and slung it over my shoulder. "I hope the signing ceremony tomorrow is everything you dreamed it would be, Cassidy." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the $500,000 check sitting entirely untouched on the wooden table. Cassidy was left staring after me, her arrogant smirk finally faltering into a look of genuine confusion. She thought she was buying a temporary problem to go away. She had absolutely no idea she had just handed the federal government a crystal-clear recorded confession of corporate conspiracy. I drove back from the coffee shop feeling a profound sense of clarity. The audio file resting on my secure server was the ultimate insurance policy. Cassidy had handed me the final puzzle piece I needed to ensure federal investigators would completely dismantle her venture capital firm. But my feeling of victory was aggressively short-lived. I had severely underestimated how quickly a wounded billionaire would retaliate. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my cell phone rang. It was the lead project manager for a logistics startup I had been consulting with for the past 6 months. We were in the middle of a massive database migration, a project that accounted for nearly 40% of my monthly freelance income. His voice was incredibly tense and clipped. He told me they were terminating my contract effective immediately. When I asked for a reason, he stammered out a generic corporate excuse about restructuring their external vendor budget. He hung up before I could ask another question. 20 minutes later, an email hit my inbox. It was from a boutique financial analytics firm that had kept me on a lucrative monthly retainer for over 2 years. The email was drafted by their legal department citing a standard termination for convenience clause. There was no phone call. There was no warning. The contract was simply gone. Over the next 3 hours, the dominoes fell with terrifying speed. Every single independent client I had painstakingly acquired over my career suddenly severed their relationship with me. Some sent brief emails. Others called and offered completely unbelievable excuses about changing corporate direction. It did not take a genius to realize what was happening. Cassidy was making good on her threat. She was furious that I had rejected her $500,000 bribe, and she was actively weaponizing her massive Silicon Valley network to completely destroy my livelihood. Cassidy sat on the advisory boards of dozens of massive tech accelerators. She was a primary investor in hundreds of companies. All it took was a few strategic phone calls to the right executives, subtly hinting that associating with my independent limited liability company would make them highly unfavorable in the eyes of her venture capital fund. In the ruthless ecosystem of tech startups, nobody was willing to risk their own funding to protect a freelance software developer. They dropped me without a second thought to protect their own bottom lines. I sat in my home office and pulled up my corporate banking dashboard. The numbers on the screen were terrifying. Jason had already frozen our joint personal accounts, leaving me with zero access to my own savings. My corporate account had been my only remaining lifeline. Now the incoming revenue stream had completely flatlined. I looked at my upcoming expenses. The heavy legal retainer for my divorce attorney had taken a massive chunk of my available cash. I had high-tier cloud server hosting fees, due by midnight fees, that were absolutely critical to maintaining the active environment for my proprietary algorithm. If I did not pay the server fees, my testing environment would go dark, potentially corrupting the intellectual property I was fighting to protect. I had to make a brutal choice. I transferred the remaining balance from my corporate checking account directly to the cloud hosting provider securing the servers for another month. The transaction cleared. My bank balance dropped to exactly $42.15. I was completely broke. I had no freelance income, no joint savings, and no emergency funds left. I was standing on the absolute brink of total financial ruin. My chest tightened with a sudden suffocating wave of panic. This was exactly how Cassidy and Jason won their battles. They used their massive financial resources to starve their opponents into submission. They wanted me sitting in this empty house, terrified of losing the roof over my head, regretting the moment I walked away from their settlement offers. My phone buzzed against the desk. It was a text message from an unknown number. It was from Cassidy. It read, "The industry is very small. Actions have consequences. Call Jason Lawyer and sign the non-disclosure agreement before you lose the house too." I stared at the glowing screen. The financial pressure was crushing, an invisible weight pressing down on my lungs. But as I looked at the text message, the panic slowly dissolved, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. She was trying to break me. But she was operating on a timeline that ended tomorrow afternoon at the signing ceremony. I did not need to survive for months. I only needed to survive for 24 more hours. I placed the phone face down on the desk. Let them take the contracts. Let them drain the accounts. Tomorrow I was going to take their entire empire. I left my phone face down on the desk for exactly 10 minutes before the screen lit up again. It was not another client terminating a contract, and it was not another legal threat from Cassidy. It was a notification from a prominent professional networking platform. My stomach tightened as I picked up the device. A former colleague had tagged me in a post. I clicked the link and my screen filled with a high-resolution video of Rich.He. She was sitting in her pristine, sunlit living room, dressed in a muted conservative sweater that made her look like a deeply concerned, empathetic sister. She was looking directly into the camera with an expression of profound sadness. The caption above the video read, "Protecting my brother, the true cost of success." I tapped the screen to unmute the audio. Rich.He let out a heavy theatrical sigh before speaking. Her voice was trembling perfectly, a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She started by talking about Jason. She painted him as a tireless visionary, a man who had sacrificed everything to build a revolutionary technology company from the ground up. She talked about his late nights, his brilliant mind, and the massive $20 million investment he was about to secure. Then the tone of her voice shifted from pride to deep manufactured sorrow. She introduced my name to her thousands of followers. Rich.He told the camera that success often attracts parasites. She claimed that I, her soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law, had suffered a complete mental breakdown when I realized Jason was moving on to a higher echelon of success. She spun a wild, entirely fabricated narrative that I was a jealous, uneducated freelancer who had contributed absolutely nothing to his company. According to her, I was simply a spectator who rode his coattails, and now that he was about to become wealthy, I was trying to extort him. She detailed the events of the past few days with completely twisted logic. She told her audience that I had illegally locked Jason out of his own home in a fit of hysterical rage. She claimed I was actively stalking and harassing his investors, trying to ruin his reputation out of pure spite. She even mentioned the $50,000 settlement Jason had generously offered me in mediation, framing it as an act of profound mercy that I had selfishly thrown back in his face. Then came the final devastating blow. Rich.He looked directly into the lens and formally, publicly disowned me. On behalf of the entire family, she stated that they were cutting all ties with me to protect Jason and his brilliant future. She warned anyone in the tech industry to avoid working with me, labeling me as toxic, unstable, and dangerous. I scrolled down to the comments section. It was an absolute bloodbath. Extended family members, people I had hosted for Thanksgiving dinners and bought Christmas presents for, were piling on. Aunts, uncles, and cousins were leaving messages of support for Jason, calling me a gold digger, a sociopath, and a fraud. Jason's fraternity brothers and country club friends were mocking my career, laughing at the idea that I could ever understand the complexities of the software he supposedly built. The post was gaining traction rapidly, racking up hundreds of likes and shares across the Silicon Valley network. Cassidy had destroyed my professional income. Now Rich.He was systematically destroying my personal reputation and my dignity on a massive public scale. They were executing a perfectly coordinated two-pronged attack designed to isolate me completely. For a brief moment, the sheer cruelty of it threatened to break through my composure. These were people who had smiled in my face and eaten at my table. To see them so easily manipulated, so eager to tear me down to protect their golden boy, was a bitter pill to swallow. I felt a hot sting of tears behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wiped my face and looked back at the screen. Brittany thought she had just delivered the final crushing blow. She thought she had publicly humiliated me into submission, but as I watched the video replay, my analytical mind took over. Brittany had just made a catastrophic error. In her desperate attempt to secure her status and protect her brother, she had publicly and permanently attached her name to his fraudulent enterprise. She had gone on the record in front of thousands of professionals confirming that Jason was the sole architect of the technology. She had committed textbook defamation, providing me with time-stamped, irrefutable video evidence of her malicious intent. I did not flag the video. I did not report the post or leave a furious comment defending myself. Instead, I opened my secure capture software and recorded the entire video in high definition. I captured screenshots of every single hateful comment from the family members. I gathered it all, packaged it neatly into a digital file, and added it to the growing mountain of evidence in my encrypted folder. The smear campaign was brutal, but it was just noise. They were playing a social game while I was building a federal case. I powered down my monitors and stood up from my desk. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty house. I had $42 in my bank account, and the entire world believed I was a jealous, crazy ex-wife. It was the perfect cover. I walked into my bedroom to pick out my sharpest suit. Tomorrow was Friday. It was time to go to a signing ceremony. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp, clear weather that Jason always claimed was a sign of his personal manifest destiny. I woke up early, drank a glass of water, and began reviewing my legal documents. Across the city, Jason was already awake and actively celebrating a victory that had not even happened yet. In his mind, Brittany's vicious social media video was the final nail in my coffin. He assumed I was hiding in my bedroom, completely crushed by the weight of my ruined reputation and my empty bank account. He felt utterly invincible. To reward himself for his supposed absolute triumph, Jason drove his leased vehicle straight to the most exclusive imported sports car dealership in the financial district. He did not wait for the $20 million venture capital wire transfer to actually clear. Instead, he used his title as the chief executive officer of a highly valued tech startup to secure massive immediate lines of corporate credit. He signed the financing paperwork for a $150,000 convertible sports car, painted a flashy, arrogant metallic silver. The dealership manager practically bowed to him as he handed over the keys, completely unaware that the financial documents Jason used to secure the loan were based entirely on stolen intellectual property. But Jason did not stop at the car dealership. His delusion of grandeur was feeding on itself, pushing him into increasingly reckless behavior. He drove his new silver sports car directly to a high-end boutique jeweler located just 2 blocks from Cassidy's venture capital firm. He walked into the velvet-lined showroom and demanded to see their most exclusive engagement rings. He wanted something that screamed wealth, a trophy to present to Cassidy after the signing ceremony to formally lock in his position within her elite social circle. He selected a massive, flawless diamond ring that cost more than the average American makes in an entire year. Once again, he leveraged his corporate credit and his pending Series A funding status to walk out of the store with the jewelry. He was spending non-existent money burying his startup under an avalanche of toxic debt before the ink on Cassidy's investment contract was even dry. He was behaving exactly like a man who believed the rules of financial reality no longer applied to him. I was sitting at my kitchen island calmly sipping my coffee and mentally rehearsing the sequence of events for the afternoon when my phone vibrated heavily against the granite countertop. I glanced at the screen. It was a picture message from Jason. I opened the text. The high-resolution image showed a massive diamond ring resting in a black velvet box positioned perfectly on the steering wheel of a brand-new sports car. The shining silver emblem of the luxury vehicle was clearly visible in the blurred background. Beneath the photo was a short, incredibly cruel message that he had typed out, a little preview of my new life. This is what happens when you operate on my level. I am giving Cassidy the ring this weekend. You had your chance to take the $50,000 and walk away with some dignity. Now you get absolutely nothing. Enjoy living in poverty, Natalie. Make sure you are out of my house by Monday. I stared at the message. He was practically vibrating with toxic arrogance. A year ago, a text like this might have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and heartbreak. I might have cried over the sheer injustice of watching him parade his unearned wealth while I sat in a house with $42 to my name. But today I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. Jason was a master of his own destruction. By purchasing luxury vehicles and diamond rings on corporate credit hours before a major financial audit, he was providing the federal investigators with real-time, irrefutable evidence of gross financial misconduct. He was proving every single allegation I had submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission. He was establishing a clear, undeniable pattern of draining corporate resources for personal vanity. He was handing me the rope he would hang himself with. I took a screenshot of the text message, the photograph of the ring, and the luxury car steering wheel. I uploaded the files directly to my encrypted server, automatically syncing them with the whistleblower data packet. I did not reply to his message. Silence was the most terrifying response I could give him, although he was currently too blinded by his own ego to realize it. I finished my coffee and walked back into my bedroom. I pulled my sharpest tailored navy suit from the closet. I meticulously ironed the crisp white shirt, making sure every crease was absolutely perfect. I brushed my hair, applied a simple, elegant layer of makeup, and slipped on my favorite pair of black heels. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I did not look like a defeated, impoverished victim. I looked like an executioner. The clock on my wall ticked past noon. It was time to attend a signing ceremony. While I was meticulously pressing the lapels of my navy suit, a completely different kind of reckoning was tearing through the manicured suburbs across town. DeAndre was sitting in his impeccably decorated home office, the one Brittany had designed to look exactly like a magazine spread rather than a functional workspace. He was logged into the family's shared enterprise cloud drive. Jason, in his infinite arrogance and stunning lack of operational security, used the same cloud directory for his personal tax documents and his startup's most sensitive legal contracts. DeAndre was running a silent script to download the final unredacted term sheets for the $20 million Series A funding round. This was the final piece of ammunition I needed. It was the direct contractual link proving Jason was selling my algorithm to Cassidy. The download progress bar reached 98%. That was when the heavy oak door to the home office swung open without a single knock. Brittany marched into the room holding her phone in one hand and a half-empty glass of sparkling water in the other. She had just finished refreshing the comment section on her vicious social media video, high on the dopamine of public validation. She started talking before she even looked at the computer screen, complaining about the catering order for Jason's celebration dinner. DeAndre did not scramble to minimize the windows. He did not flinch. He simply let the download complete, the green confirmation checkmark appearing brightly on his monitor. Brittany stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes locked onto the glowing screen, recognizing the highly confidential legal headers of Jason's corporate documents. The smug, victorious expression melted off her face, replaced instantly by a sharp defensive glare. She stepped forward, her voice rising in pitch. "What exactly are you doing, DeAndre?" she demanded, setting her glass down hard on the desk. "Why are you digging through my brother's corporate drive? Are you trying to find out how much money he is making? I cannot believe you are acting this incredibly petty right now." DeAndre safely ejected his encrypted flash drive and slipped it into his suit pocket. He slowly stood up, towering over his wife. The calm, accommodating persona he had worn for the duration of their marriage completely vanished. "I am not looking at his money, Brittany," DeAndre said, his voice dangerously low and steady. I am looking at his prison sentence. Your brother is committing federal wire fraud and he is trying to drag this entire family down with him. He stole Natalie's algorithm, forged her signature, and is currently lying to federal investigators. Brittany scoffed loudly, waving her hand in the air as if swatting away a fly. Oh my God, she groaned. You have been talking to that crazy woman, have you not? You are actually buying into her pathetic delusions. Jason is a tech visionary. Natalie is just a jealous nobody trying to ruin his big day. Stop acting like an ungrateful traitor, and remember which family puts a roof over your head. That was the breaking point. The phrase ungrateful traitor echoed in the quiet room. DeAndre looked at the woman he had married, finally seeing her without any filters or excuses. Ungrateful, DeAndre repeated the word, dripping with pure disgust. I am a senior forensic accountant at one of the top firms in the country. I pay the mortgage on this house. I pay for your country club membership. But to you and your parents, I am just a diversity prop. I am the well-dressed black man you parade around your racist friends at dinner parties to prove how progressive you are. But the second we are behind closed doors, you treat me like the hired help. Brittany gasped, taking a dramatic step back, clutching her chest. How dare you call my family racist? We welcomed you with open arms. We gave you everything. You gave me nothing! DeAndre roared, his voice finally vibrating with years of suppressed rage. You tolerate me as long as I stay quiet and make you look good. The minute Jason needs a financial audit covered up, you expect me to risk my entire federal license to rubber stamp his lies. You expect me to protect a thief because he shares your blood. You all watched Jason steal from the woman who funded his entire life, and you cheered him on because you think you are inherently better than her. You look down on Natalie the exact same way you look down on me. Brittany's face twisted into an ugly, furious sneer. You are just jealous, she spat venomously. You are jealous because my brother is about to be worth $20 million, and you are just a glorified bookkeeper. If you dare do anything to jeopardize Jason's deal, I will divorce you. I will take this house, I will drain your accounts, and I will make sure you are left with absolutely nothing. DeAndre looked at her, his expression shifting from burning anger to a profound, icy calm. He reached out and picked up his briefcase from the floor. He snapped the golden latches shut. Brittany thought her threat of divorce was the ultimate weapon. She thought she was holding his entire life hostage. She had no idea that DeAndre had already packed his bags and that her empty threats were the exact confirmation he needed to finally walk out the door. Brittany stared at the leather briefcase in DeAndre's hand, her mouth hanging slightly open. The vicious threat she had just hurled at him hung uselessly in the air. She had expected him to grovel, to apologize, and to beg her to save their marriage. Instead, DeAndre reached his hand into the top compartment of the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents securely bound by a heavy metal clip. He tossed the stack directly onto Brittany's lap. The papers landed with a heavy thud against her pristine sweater. She looked down, her eyes scanning the bold, black text printed across the top page. It was a formal petition for dissolution of marriage. I filed those yesterday morning. DeAndre said, his voice devoid of any emotion. You do not have to worry about draining my accounts, Brittany. My legal team has already secured a financial restraining order protecting my personal assets, and my federal license is completely insulated from your brother's impending criminal investigation. You thought you were holding all the cards, but you have been playing at an empty table. Brittany scrambled to her feet, the divorce papers sliding off her lap and scattering across the expensive hardwood floor. DeAndre, you cannot do this, she stammered, the toxic arrogance finally fracturing into genuine panic. Think about the family. Think about our reputation. DeAndre did not even blink. I am thinking about my reputation, he replied coldly, and I am finally cutting the dead weight. He turned his back on her and walked out of the home office. He moved down the long, brightly lit hallway to the front foyer where a large black suitcase was already sitting neatly by the front door. He had packed it before she even came home from her country club lunch. Brittany chased after him, her heels echoing frantically against the floorboards. She tried grabbing his arm, suddenly shifting her tactic from aggressive threats to desperate sobbing apologies. She promised they could go to counseling. She promised she would talk to Jason. She offered every empty solution she could think of to maintain her perfect suburban facade. DeAndre shook his arm free. He opened the heavy front door, stepped out into the cool evening air, and looked back at her one last time. Goodbye, Brittany. Call a good lawyer. You are going to need one when the federal investigators ask why Jason transferred $80,000 into your offshore account. He pulled the door shut, cutting off her terrified scream. He walked down the driveway, threw his suitcase into the trunk of his car, and slid behind the steering wheel. As he put the car in drive and pulled away from the manicured lawns and massive colonial houses, a profound sense of relief washed over him. The suffocating weight of their conditional approval was finally gone. He navigated the winding suburban streets, heading straight toward the other side of the city. He had one final piece of business to attend to before his exit was truly complete. 30 minutes later, DeAndre pulled into Natalie's driveway. The house was dark, except for the warm light spilling from the home office window. He walked up to the porch and rang the doorbell. A moment later, the heavy door swung open. Natalie stood in the entryway, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit. She looked sharp-focused and completely unbothered by the brutal social media campaign her soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law had launched against her earlier that day. DeAndre stepped inside, locking the new deadbolt behind him. He followed her into the kitchen, dropping his briefcase onto the granite island. He popped the latches open and pulled out a sleek encrypted flash drive along with a thick stack of freshly printed paper. He slid the documents across the counter toward her. "This is the final unredacted term sheet for the Series A funding round," DeAndre said, tapping the top page. "I pulled it directly from Jason's Enterprise Cloud Drive right before I walked out on Brittany." Natalie picked up the document, her eyes rapidly scanning the dense legal text. "Look at page 14, DeAndre instructed. Natalie flipped the pages. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the highlighted section. Cassidy's venture capital firm was not just investing in Jason's holding company. The contract contained an explicit targeted acquisition clause. Cassidy was specifically valuing the proprietary predictive algorithm at $15 million, making it the undeniable core of the entire $20 million deal. The contract legally bound Jason as the sole creator and undisputed owner of the technology. "They locked it in writing," Natalie whispered, tracing the printed words with her finger. "They locked it in a binding federal financial contract," DeAndre corrected her. "Once Jason and Cassidy sign this document tomorrow afternoon, they cross the line from corporate negligence into deliberate, documented financial fraud. Cassidy's legal team drafted this contract to protect her investment, but they accidentally created a perfect confession. The SEC will not even need to dig for evidence. It is all right there in black and white." Natalie looked up from the term sheet, a cold, dangerous smile spreading across her face. She closed the folder and placed her hand flat against the leather cover. "Jason thought freezing my bank accounts would leave me defenseless. Cassidy thought taking away my freelance clients would force me to surrender. They thought they had backed me into a corner." DeAndre zipped his briefcase closed. "What time is the signing ceremony tomorrow?" 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Natalie replied, picking up the encrypted flash drive. "Right in the middle of Cassidy's massive glass boardroom. It is going to be a very crowded room." DeAndre nodded, a matching smile appearing on his face. "Get some sleep, Natalie. Tomorrow we burn their empire to the ground." Across the city, in this private dining room of a Michelin-starred restaurant overlooking the skyline, Jason and Cassidy were already spending their imaginary millions. The table was covered in empty plates that had previously held imported Wagyu beef and delicate truffles. 2 bottles of vintage champagne, each costing more than my first car, sat empty in silver ice buckets. Jason leaned across the candlelit table, his face flushed with alcohol and unearned victory. He reached into the breast pocket of his custom-tailored suit jacket and pulled out the black velvet box he had purchased on credit earlier that afternoon. He flipped the lid open, revealing the massive diamond ring. It caught the dim restaurant lighting, throwing sharp glints of light across the expensive linen tablecloth. Cassidy let out a practiced, elegant gasp. She extended her left hand, allowing Jason to slide the ridiculous stone onto her finger. It was not a proposal born out of genuine love or mutual respect. It was a corporate merger masked as romance. It was a physical symbol of their shared arrogance, a trophy to signal to the rest of Silicon Valley that they were the ultimate power couple. Cassidy admired the ring, taking a slow sip from her crystal flute. She leaned forward and confidently assured Jason that the minor inconveniences of the past week were entirely over. She bragged about the phone calls she had made to terminate my freelance contracts, gloating about how easily she had crushed my entire livelihood in a single afternoon. They laughed together, raising their glasses in a toast to their own brilliance. They genuinely believed I was sitting alone in a dark, empty house, crying over my ruined reputation and my frozen bank accounts. They were half right. I was sitting in my house, but I was not crying. I was sitting at the massive dining room table with DeAndre, turning my home into a tactical war room. The granite island in the kitchen was buried under a mountain of paperwork. DeAndre had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, his forensic accounting skills in full overdrive. He was methodically cross-referencing the unredacted term sheets he had pulled from the cloud drive with the forged tax disclosures Jason had submitted to the federal government. Every time he found a direct, undeniable contradiction, he highlighted it in bright yellow and added it to a master timeline we were building on a large whiteboard. I was stationed at my laptop, finalizing the most destructive piece of the puzzle. DeAndre had provided the proof of the fraud, but I needed a mechanism to instantly obliterate the value of Jason's company the second the truth came out. If I simply proved the code was mine, Cassidy could theoretically drag me into years of grueling civil litigation attempting to tie up the intellectual property in court to protect her investment. I needed to remove the asset from the table entirely. I opened a secure communication channel with the senior partners at Vanguard Capital. They were Cassidy's biggest, most aggressive competitors in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. They despised her firm and they had massive pools of liquid capital ready to deploy. I sent them a highly encrypted read-only preview of my algorithm's core architecture, along with my official federal copyright certificates proving I was the sole owner. I offered them an exclusive, irrevocable licensing agreement for the technology at a fraction of the cost Cassidy was about to pay Jason. It was an offer Vanguard would never refuse because it gave them superior technology while simultaneously humiliating their biggest rival. DeAndre walked over and set a fresh cup of coffee next to my keyboard. He looked at the licensing contract on my screen and let out a low whistle of genuine respect. He noted that the moment I executed that agreement, Jason's startup would legally own absolutely nothing but empty servers and massive debt. I nodded, typing in the final legal parameters. We spent the next 4 hours assembling the physical trap. We created 3 identical heavy black leather binders. Inside each binder, we placed the federal whistleblower confirmation numbers, the forged tax documents, the highlighted term sheets proving Cassidy's intent to acquire stolen property, and the transcript of the audio recording where Cassidy admitted to covering up a federal audit. We organized the evidence with brutal, undeniable clarity. There was no room for interpretation. There were no loopholes left open. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the binders were perfectly compiled and stacked near the front door. DeAndre crashed on the guest room bed to get a few hours of sleep. I stood by the front window looking out into the quiet, dark street. The trap was set. The bait was taken. All that was left was to walk into the boardroom and shut the cage. Friday afternoon arrived with a bright, beautiful blue sky. It was the perfect weather for a complete corporate destruction. I parked my own car 3 blocks away from the glass skyscraper housing Cassidy's venture capital firm. I carried the 3 heavy black leather binders in a sleek tote bag. Walking through the revolving doors at exactly 1:45, bypassing the ground floor security desk required absolute confidence. I waited near the elevator banks until executive caterers arrived, pushing silver carts loaded with champagne. I stepped into the middle of their group, holding my phone to my ear, as if engaged in a corporate call. My tailored navy suit made me look like a partner managing the event. The security guard, completely distracted by the chaos of the catering crew, barely glanced at me as I slipped past the heavy metal turnstiles and stepped confidently into the private elevator. The doors opened on the 42nd floor, revealing a sprawling office space filled with natural light. I stepped out, my heels sinking into the plush carpeting. The main executive boardroom was a massive, fully transparent glass cube situated in the center of the floor, As I walked down the corridor, I had a completely unobstructed view of the people inside. 8 people were gathered around an enormous mahogany table. I recognized several senior partners from the venture capital firm, older men who controlled billions of dollars in assets. At the head of the table sat Cassidy, radiating absolute triumph. Next to her was Jason. He looked like a king about to be crowned. He wore a brand new charcoal suit, his posture vibrating with arrogant excitement. A massive stack of bound legal contracts sat directly in front of him. I slowed my pace as I approached the glass wall. Nobody noticed me yet. They were entirely focused on the paper. Cassidy leaned over, pointing a manicured finger at the bottom line of the final page. Jason nodded eagerly. He picked up a gold-plated fountain pen. I watched him uncap it, the metal flashing under the lighting. He hovered the tip of the pen just millimeters above the signature line. The $20 million transaction was literally seconds away from becoming a legally binding reality. I did not knock. I reached out, grabbed the stainless steel handle, and pushed the door open. The soundproof seal broke with a soft hiss, suddenly flooding the quiet hallway with the low murmur of corporate conversation from inside the room. I stepped directly into the boardroom, letting the heavy glass door swing shut behind me. The entire room froze. 8 heads snapped in my direction simultaneously. Jason's hand jerked violently, the gold fountain pen skidding across the thick parchment paper, leaving a jagged streak of black ink across the signature line. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked physically ill. His mouth fell open, his eyes widening in absolute terror. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost walk through a solid wall. Next to him, Cassidy shot up from her leather chair. Her smug, triumphant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of sheer explosive fury. She slammed her hands down onto the mahogany table, her designer rings clattering loudly against the wood. "What are you doing here?" Cassidy demanded, her voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. "How did you get past the security desk? This is a restricted floor. I am calling the building guards right now to have you forcibly removed." The senior partners exchanged irritated glances. One older man with silver hair frowned and asked why a stranger was interrupting a confidential closing. Jason found his voice, though it was nothing more than a panicked stammer. He pointed a shaking finger at me, desperately trying to salvage his moment. "Gentlemen, I apologize." Jason stuttered, his voice cracking. "This is my estranged wife. She is completely unstable. She is just trying to cause a scene because we are in the middle of a hostile divorce. Please ignore her while security handles this." I did not raise my voice. I did not act unstable. I simply walked forward, closing the distance until I was standing directly across the mahogany table from Jason and Cassidy. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the 3 heavy black binders. I placed them onto the polished wood. The heavy thud of the binders hitting the table silenced the entire room. "I am not here to cause a scene, Jason," I said, my voice cold, steady, and projecting clearly to every single senior partner. "I am here to save these gentlemen from committing $20 million to a documented federal fraud." Cassidy's face twisted into an ugly mask of sheer desperation. She reached for the glowing touchscreen console embedded in the center of the mahogany table and slammed her hand against the security panic button. She yelled at the top of her lungs, demanding that the building guards get up to the 42nd floor immediately and physically remove me from the premises. Jason was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he frantically tried to gather the scattered pages of the $20 million contract, as if hiding the paper would somehow hide his guilt. I did not wait for the security guards to arrive. I unzipped the side pocket of my tote bag and pulled out a small, sleek, wireless transmitter. During my years of freelance consulting, I had integrated presentation hardware for dozens of corporate offices exactly like this one. I knew that the massive 80-inch digital displays lining the boardroom walls operated on a standard secure wireless casting protocol. I pressed the synchronization button on my device. The massive screen suddenly flickered, cutting off Cassidy corporate logo and replacing it with the direct video feed from my encrypted server. The room went completely dark for a fraction of a second, before the screens illuminated the faces of the senior partners with a blinding white light. Displayed in razor-sharp high definition across every single monitor in the room was my official United States copyright certificate. Right next to it was the utility patent registration issued by the federal government. Both documents bore the heavy, undeniable government seals. I stepped back from the table, allowing the senior partners a clear, unobstructed view of the massive screens. I want you to look very closely at the dates and the names listed on those federal documents, I said, making sure my voice carried over Jason's frantic breathing. That is the core predictive algorithm you are attempting to acquire today. You will notice that it was registered 3 years ago. You will also notice that it is owned entirely by my independent limited liability company. Jason did not write that code. Jason does not own that code. He is attempting to sell you an empty shell company built entirely on stolen intellectual property. The silver-haired senior partner, the one who had spoken earlier, stood up slowly. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his suit pocket and stepped closer to the largest screen. He read the technical descriptions, his eyes tracking back and forth across the legal jargon. He looked down at the highlighted term sheets I had placed in the black binders on the table. He turned to Jason, his expression shifting from mild irritation to absolute furious disbelief. "You told us you built this architecture from the ground up," the senior partner said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly register. "You signed preliminary disclosures under penalty of perjury, stating your holding company had free and clear title to these assets." Jason was physically shaking. He looked at Cassidy silently, begging her to save him. But Cassidy was staring at the screens, her mouth opening and closing, as the reality of her catastrophic failure finally crashed down on her. She had skipped the technical due diligence to rush a trophy investment, and now her incompetence was being broadcast to the highest-ranking executives in her firm. "It is a mistake," Jason stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "She was my wife. What is hers is mine. We built it together. She is just trying to confuse the legal ownership." I reached out and opened the first black binder, flipping directly to the second page. I slid it across the mahogany table toward the silver-haired partner. "That is a lie," I stated firmly. "And here is the proof. That is a copy of Jason's corporate tax return. He submitted a forged intellectual property transfer agreement to the Internal Revenue Service to justify your $20 million valuation. He forged my signature to make it look like I surrendered my company to him for $1. The senior partner picked up the binder. He stared at the forged signature, then looked back at the federal patent on the screen. The air in the room grew incredibly heavy. The other executives began opening their own binders, their faces turning grim as they saw the mountain of financial discrepancies, the misallocated seed funds, and the fake asset declarations DeAndre had so carefully documented. Cassidy finally found her voice. She lunged forward, slamming her hands on the table again. "Do not listen to her!" Cassidy shouted, her polished demeanor completely shattered. "We can fix this. We can restructure the deal. We will buy the intellectual property directly from her right now. We have the capital. We can just cut Jason out and acquire the algorithm directly." She was trying to pivot. She was trying to throw Jason straight under the bus to save her own career and salvage the massive investment. Jason stared at her in absolute shock, realizing the woman he had just bought a diamond ring for was discarding him without a second thought. But Cassidy was about to learn that her money could not buy her way out of the trap I had built. Cassidy stood at the edge of the mahogany table, completely abandoning the man she had just accepted a diamond ring from hours ago. She did not even look at Jason as she spoke. She locked her eyes entirely on me, slipping seamlessly into the ruthless negotiator persona that had made her a billionaire. "We can restructure the capital stack right now," Cassidy said, her voice rapid and desperate. "The $20 million is already sitting in our escrow account. We can strike Jason from the cap table entirely. We will draft a direct acquisition contract between my firm and your independent limited liability company. Name your price, Natalie. 25 million, 30 million. We can wire the initial deposit before you even leave this building." Jason stared at her, his face a portrait of absolute devastation. The illusion of his irresistible charm and their supposed power couple romance evaporated in a single second. He reached out and grabbed her forearm, his fingers digging into her expensive silk blazer. "Cassidy, you cannot do this," Jason pleaded, his voice cracking pitifully. "We are partners. We are getting married. You are wearing my ring." Cassidy ripped her arm out of his grasp with a look of profound, unfiltered disgust. "Do not touch me, you pathetic fraud," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You lied to my face. You forged federal documents. You jeopardized my firm and my money. You are absolutely nothing to me." She turned back to me, forcibly smoothing her blazer and attempting to force a professional smile. "Let us talk business, Natalie. You are clearly a brilliant woman. You outplayed him. I respect that, but you are sitting on a gold mine and you need institutional backing to scale it. Let us cut the dead weight and make each other very rich." The silver-haired senior partner remained completely silent, watching Cassidy humiliate herself in front of the entire executive board. He recognized exactly what was happening. Cassidy was bleeding and she was trying to throw cash at a fatal wound. I stood perfectly still, letting her desperate offer echo off the glass walls. I looked at Jason, who was now slumped in his heavy leather chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. Then I looked at Cassidy, and I allowed a slow, cold smile to spread across my face. "I appreciate the offer, Cassidy," I said evenly. "But I'm not here to negotiate a buyout. I am not interested in your money, and I am certainly not interested in doing business with a venture capital firm that conducts such incredibly sloppy due diligence." I reached back into my black tote bag and pulled out a single thin blue folder. I bypassed Cassidy entirely and slid the folder directly across the polished wood toward the silver-haired senior partner. "What is that?" Cassidy demanded, her voice shrill with rising panic. She tried to reach for it, but the senior partner placed his hand firmly over the folder, blocking her. He opened the cover, adjusted his reading glasses, and scanned the first page. I watched the blood drain from his weathered face. He let out a long, heavy breath, removed his glasses, and looked directly at Cassidy with an expression of pure corporate fury. "It is an exclusive licensing agreement," the senior partner said, his voice dangerously quiet. "An agreement with who?" Cassidy asked, her breathing becoming shallow and erratic. I answered the question for him. "With Vanguard Capital." The name hit the room like a physical shockwave. Vanguard Capital was Cassidy's absolute fiercest rival in Silicon Valley. They were the apex predators who had been ruthlessly competing with her firm for the past decade. I signed the finalized contract with Vanguard Senior Partners at exactly 1 o'clock this afternoon. I explained, my voice ringing with undeniable finality. "They now hold the exclusive, irrevocable global rights to the predictive algorithm. They have already initiated the encrypted code transfer from my secure servers. The technology is completely off the market." Cassidy stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the plush carpet. She caught herself on the back of her chair, her face turning an ashen, sickly gray. "That means the $20 million contract sitting on this table is completely worthless." I continued, driving the final nail into their coffin. Jason's startup owns absolutely nothing. There is no proprietary asset. There is no competitive market advantage. He is the chief executive officer of an empty corporate shell, drowning in luxury debt he secured using falsified assets. The boardroom descended into a stunned, suffocating silence. The trap had snapped shut with perfect precision. Cassidy had not just lost the deal, she had been publicly humiliated in front of her board of directors, and she had just handed her biggest rival the most advanced financial technology on the market. Jason was officially ruined, left with no company, no money, and a mountain of federal fraud charges waiting for him. The $20 million empire they thought they had stolen from me was officially dead. The silence in the boardroom shattered like fragile glass. The silver-haired senior partner slammed the blue Vanguard Capital folder onto the mahogany table with enough force to make the crystal water glasses rattle. He turned his attention entirely to Cassidy, his face flushed with unadulterated corporate rage. He demanded to know how a senior partner, someone entrusted with billions of dollars of institutional capital, could authorize a $20 million acquisition without running a basic fundamental patent search on the core technology. Cassidy shrank back, her arrogant posture completely collapsing. She frantically tried to shift the blame, stuttering that her junior analysts were responsible for the granular paperwork and that Jason had provided heavily falsified ledgers. She claimed she was a victim of his deception. But the senior partner was not interested in her pathetic excuses. He reached into the black binder I had provided and pulled out the printed transcript of our conversation at the coffee shop. He read her own words back to her, highlighting the exact moment she admitted to manipulating her political connections to deliberately delay a federal tax audit just so she could close the deal and cover up Jason's financial irregularities. He threw the transcript back onto the table. He told Cassidy that she had catastrophically violated her fiduciary duties and exposed the entire venture capital firm to massive federal liability. He did not ask her to resign. He fired her on the spot. He officially stripped her of her senior partnership title and announced that her equity shares in the firm were immediately frozen, pending a comprehensive internal investigation. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. Two large building security guards stepped inside. They were the guards Cassidy had frantically summoned to remove me. Instead, the senior partner pointed a shaking finger directly at Cassidy. He ordered the guards to escort her to her corner office, provide her with one cardboard box for her personal items, and then march her out the front doors of the building. He specifically instructed them to permanently revoke her electronic access badges and confiscate her corporate phone. Cassidy opened her mouth to argue, but the sheer, overwhelming anger of the board members silenced her. The guards stepped forward, flanked her on both sides, and escorted the former billionaire out of the glass room in absolute disgrace. Jason sat frozen in his heavy leather chair, watching his entire future walk out the door in the custody of two security guards. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically around the room. The senior partner slowly turned his deadly gaze toward Jason. He informed Jason that the firm was immediately turning over the forged intellectual property transfer agreements and the falsified financial disclosures to their internal legal department. They were going to compile a massive fraud dossier and hand-deliver it directly to the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The senior partner promised Jason that they would cooperate fully with federal prosecutors to ensure he faced maximum sentencing for attempted wire fraud, securities fraud, and the deliberate deception of institutional investors. The reality of his situation finally crashed down on Jason. The $20 million valuation was gone. The startup was a hollow, worthless shell. He had absolutely no proprietary technology to sell. What he did have was a mountain of toxic corporate debt. He had purchased a $150,000 sports car and a massive diamond ring on credit lines he could no longer pay. He had drained his angel investor funds to pay for luxury hotel suites. He was not just broke. He was millions of dollars in debt and staring down the barrel of a decade in federal prison. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. He looked like a terrified child. He opened his mouth desperately, trying to formulate an apology, to beg me to withdraw the licensing deal or recall the whistleblower complaints. But before he could speak a single word, his cell phone began to vibrate violently against the polished mahogany table. The bright screen illuminated, displaying an incoming call from Brittany. She was undoubtedly calling in a state of absolute hysteria. DeAndre had walked out on her, served her with divorce papers, and left her completely exposed to the federal fallout of the offshore accounts Jason had forced her to use. The pristine, wealthy suburban life she had built was collapsing just as rapidly as Jason's tech empire. The phone stopped vibrating, then immediately began ringing again. A text message banner flashed across the top of the screen. Brittany was screaming through the digital text, demanding Jason answer the phone because her bank had just placed a hard freeze on all of her personal assets. Jason did not reach for the phone. He just sat there, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his ruin, staring blankly at the ruined contract while his phone buzzed endlessly against the wood. I stood quietly watching the empire of lies burn to the ground. I did not stay to watch the security guards pack up Cassidy's corner office. I did not wait to hear the senior partners dial the federal authorities to report Jason. I reached out, picked up my empty black tote bag, and turned my back on the wreckage I had just created. The heavy glass door of the boardroom hissed shut behind me, instantly silencing the frantic, panicked voices inside. I walked down the plush carpeted hallway with a steady, rhythmic pace. For the first time in 4 years, I felt completely weightless. The suffocating burden of Jason's ego, his lies, and his toxic family had been entirely lifted from my shoulders. I pressed the elevator button and watched the digital floor indicator light up. Just as the brushed steel doors began to slide open, I heard the heavy, desperate thud of footsteps running down the corridor. "Natalie, wait. Please wait." It was Jason. He had broken free from the boardroom and chased after me. He threw his arm out, catching the elevator door just before it closed, forcefully pushing himself inside the narrow cabin with me. The doors sealed shut, locking us together for the 42-floor descent. He looked absolutely pathetic. His expensive charcoal suit, the one he had worn to project the image of a tech billionaire, was rumpled and soaked in nervous sweat. His hair was disheveled. The arrogant sneer he had worn all week had been entirely replaced by a mask of sheer, unfiltered terror. He was openly weeping, tears streaming down his face, his breathing coming in ragged, desperate gasps. "Natalie, you have to fix this!" Jason begged, dropping his hands to his knees, as if he could barely hold himself upright. "You have to call Vanguard Capital. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them the code belongs to my holding company. If you do not reverse that licensing deal, the SEC is going to put me in federal prison. I will lose everything. The car, the apartment, the credit lines. I am millions in debt, Natalie." I leaned against the cool metal wall of the elevator, watching him unravel. It was fascinating to see how quickly a man who claimed to be a self-made genius turned into a helpless child the moment his stolen safety net was ripped away. "I cannot reverse a federal copyright and a binding licensing agreement, Jason," I said, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "And even if I could, I would not. You made your choices. You forged my signature. You drained your investors' money to buy sports cars and diamond rings for a woman who just threw you to the wolves to save her own skin." He fell to his knees on the floor of the elevator, literally groveling at my feet. "We are married, Natalie," he sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of my skirt. I pulled my leg back, refusing to let him touch me. "I am your husband. I am sorry. I was stupid. Cassidy manipulated me. Brittany pressured me. I will do anything you want. I will sign the divorce papers today. You can have the house. You can have whatever is left in the bank accounts. Just please call the federal prosecutors and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please save me." The elevator chimed a soft, bright note as it reached the ground floor. The doors slid open, revealing the massive, sunlit lobby of the financial building. I stepped out, leaving him kneeling on the floor of the elevator. He scrambled to his feet and followed me out into the center of the lobby, still weeping, still begging, completely ignoring the stares of the security guards and corporate professionals walking past us. I stopped near the revolving glass doors and turned to face him one last time. He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, clinging to the desperate hope that I would suddenly show him the mercy he had never shown me. I reached into the pocket of my tailored navy suit. My fingers brushed against the folded piece of paper I had kept with me since the night of the networking gala. I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was the exact same crisp $1 bill Cassidy had shoved into my collar while Jason pretended not to know who I was. I stepped closer to him. He held his breath. I reached out and carefully tucked the dollar bill into the wrinkled breast pocket of his charcoal suit jacket. "Buy yourself a coffee. You're not worth any more than this." I turned around and pushed through the revolving glass doors, stepping out into the warm, bright afternoon sun. The air smelled like freedom. I walked down the bustling city pavement toward the curb where a sleek black luxury sedan was already idling in the loading zone. The passenger door swung open as I approached. Sitting behind the steering wheel, wearing a sharp suit and a massive, triumphant smile, was DeAndre. He had finalized his financial separation from Brittany, left his toxic accounting firm, and officially accepted my offer to become the chief financial officer of my newly minted Vanguard-backed tech company. "How did the meeting go?" DeAndre asked as I slid into the leather passenger seat and closed the door. "Exactly as planned," I replied, fastening my seatbelt. "The algorithm is secure and Jason's startup is officially bankrupt." DeAndre laughed, shifting the car into gear. "Let us get to work, boss." I looked out the tinted window as we pulled away from the curb. Jason had stumbled out of the building and collapsed onto the concrete pavement. He was clutching his chest, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands, surrounded by the towering glass skyscrapers of an empire he would never be a part of. He had tried to steal my future, but all he managed to do was secure his own destruction. To everyone watching this story, let this be a reminder. Never let anyone convince you that your hard work is just a hobby. Never let toxic people dim your brilliance to feed their own egos. Know your worth, secure your boundaries, and when they try to tear you down, use their own arrogance to build your empire. Thank you for listening, and remember, the best revenge is massive, undeniable success. The narrative of Natalie's systematic dismantling of a fraudulent corporate empire offers a profound lesson on the true nature of power. It teaches us that authentic strength does not lie in loud emotional outbursts or public confrontations, but in silent, meticulous preparation and an unwavering understanding of one's own worth. In modern society, especially within the high-stakes environments of business and toxic relationships, manipulators often weaponize emotion. They use financial control, social smear campaigns, and gaslighting to force their victims into a state of desperate reactivity. The antagonists in this story expected their victim to crumble under the weight of frozen bank accounts and shattered professional networks. However, the story beautifully illustrates that the most devastating counterattack is a foundation built on undeniable facts and foresight. By securing her intellectual property through corporate entities, federal copyrights, and patents, long before the conflict ever began, the protagonist fortified her position. She did not need to scream to be heard. Her legally binding documents spoke for her. This highlights a crucial reality for modern women, navigating complex personal and professional spheres. Your intellect and your creations are your ultimate leverage. We must treat our time, our energy, and our innovations with the utmost respect. When you know exactly what you bring to the table, and you have taken the concrete steps to protect it, no amount of arrogance, inherited wealth, or manipulation can dismantle your reality. You become completely immune to the petty noise of toxic individuals trying to claim your hard-earned success as their own. The sweetest revenge is never simply about destroying someone else. It is about reclaiming your absolute independence and securing your future. Take a moment today to legally and unapologetically secure your personal assets, protect your brilliant ideas, and walk away from any table where your true worth is no longer respected.